Hey everyone, HardlyBriefDan here with a new part of my free course on the basics of Unreal Engine with blueprints and fundamentals of programming. This video is the 6th section of my course and is focused on creating interactions with the world through interfaces and then ultimately creating a switch for the player to turn off our lightning obstacles. The previous section, linked above, is section 5 where we added player health and damage to our project. Please check it out if you're just joining in on the series. As always, you can complete the full course today and for free on Udemy. You can also get my free ebook on programming fundamentals by signing up on my website. All those links are in the description below. Let's go ahead and get started. In this section, we're going to add a key component to our prototype, the switch. The switch will be responsible for activating and deactivating obstacles, in this case the tornado, which will then give the player a certain amount of time to reach the goal location before the switch turns back on, thus reactivating the obstacles. Our design will allow the player to interact and turn the switch off. The switch should then provide feedback to the player by changing colors and playing a sound. The switch will remain off for a certain amount of time and then automatically turn back on, again changing colors and playing a sound. Remember, in game design, the player provides an input. The game that should then react and provide feedback, either positive or negative, to the player's input. This feedback loop is important and allows us to create immersive and fun gameplay loops. As we design and build the switch, keep in mind how we are providing feedback so the player can react. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we left off in the last section where we created an on-death event. When our player runs into the tornado, they die, and we ragdoll the character. Now we want to create the switch component and create some way for our character to interact with the world. The way we're going to do that is by using a keyboard input. So I'm in the BP third-person character blueprint class. I'm in the event graph. Under our on-death event, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to right-click and say keyboard. And this gives us a ton of key options. I'm going to select the E option. And this gives me the capability to respond to the pressed event or the released event. In this case, I'm going to print text that says hello every time I hit E. I'm going to compile and save, and we're going to just test this out to make sure it works. So I'm going to press play. If I come into the world and I hit E on my keyboard, you can see the top left, it says hello. I'm going to do it a bunch of times. So now that we know we can interact with our keyboard, we can do something. So let's go back into our character and talk about it. So when we interact with the world, we're pressing E, we want to do something. Well, we want to check to see if there's anything near us, like a switch, and interact with that switch. And we can do that with collision. So if we go back to our viewport, I go to our character, we're going to click add, and we're going to type in sphere. This is going to give us a sphere collider. You can see it in orange. I'm going to hit enter to name it sphere. If you come over to the details panel and you click the lock symbol so it's locked, you can then adjust the values, adjust one value, and it will adjust all of them. So I'm going to type in 4 to make the interaction sphere bigger. What we're going to do with this sphere, I hit compile and save, go back to the event graph. We're going to, when we hit E on our keyboard, we're going to get all the overlapping actors for that sphere collider. And the way we do that is with a built-in node. So I'm going to click and drag the sphere collider into my event graph. From that, I'm going to say get overlapping actors. This node is going to provide us with an array of actors that it's overlapped with. So this could be 1, this could be 0, or it could be hundreds. It depends on how big your sphere is and how many actors are nearby. But this is going to provide us a list of actors that we can potentially interact with. It's up to us to then add the functionality to do so. So what we're going to do is loop through every single actor. So I'm going to create a for each loop, and we're going to connect the text to the execute pin here. Let me move this around to make it a little bit more organized for us. So we're going to loop through every single actor that we overlap with, and then in the loop body, we're going to have to add an ability or a way to interact. And we're going to be doing that through an interface. But before we do that, in the next lecture, we're going to create the switch. And then in the third lecture, we're actually going to create the ability to interact with that switch using an interface. So in the previous lecture, we created a way to put input in, right? We can hit the keyboard and hit E. We're printing text to the world saying hello. And for every actor that we overlap with that sphere collider that we created, we're going to loop through each actor and do something. Well, that something is going to be interact, but we don't have that capability yet. And we also don't have an actor to interact with. So let's go into our content browser. I clicked it down below. In our blueprints folder, I'm going to right click and we're going to create a new blueprint class of an actor. I'm going to say BPA underscore switch. We'll double click and open that up. We will then, in our browser, we're going to click add and we are going to add a cube. So I'm going to scroll down and click cube. This is going to create a basic cube for us. I'm going to go into our third person map. Click and drag our cube into the world, and there you see we have a cube now in the world that is going to be our switch for now. We are going to go into the variable section of our BPA underscore switch. We're going to add a variable called isOn. This will be a Boolean value, so it's true or false. It's going to default, once we hit compile and save, we'll set the default value to true, meaning the switch will start on and we can switch it off. And so now if we go to our third person map, I press play, we run up to the switch, I'm going to hit E on my keyboard. We can't do anything. There's no way for us to turn the switch on or off. And what we want to do is use the thing called an interface. So in the next lecture, we're going to create an interface, talk about what they are, and then implement it on our BPA switch so that our player character inside the event graph in this for loop, we can actually call the interact function that comes from that interface. So let's go ahead and do that. So now we're going to create an interface in Blueprints. Interfaces can be created in both Blueprints and in C++, but in this lecture, we'll do it in Blueprints since it's pretty quick and easy. Well, what exactly is an interface? An interface allows us to implement common functionality across different objects or actors without tightly coupling them together. This means that we can create a function in an interface and then implement that interface on any actor we want. So, for example, we have our switch actor we just created. By implementing an interface on the switch actor, it will now have the ability to define the logic for that function. What's great about interfaces is their flexibility. I could implement the same interface on another actor and write a completely different set of logic, but still use the same function name. This allows us to call the function from another object way more easily. Another key benefit of interfaces is that they help us avoid casting to a specific actor to access its functions like we did for when we apply damage to our character. Instead, we can simply check to see if the actor implements the interface and then call the function directly if it does. So, we're going to create an interactable interface and create a function called interact. We will then implement this interface on our switch actor. This will give us access to the interact function that we can then build custom logic, meaning we can define what it means to interact with that switch. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's create an interface. I'm going to go to our content browser. I'm in my Blueprints folder. I'm going to right click, come up to the search box and type in interface. There's a thing called a blueprint interface. We'll click that. We're going to label this interactable, and I'm going to add BPI underscore to the front. So it's BPI interactable. Double click to open it up, and it looks like a normal blueprint. However, it does say read only in interface. This means that we can't actually define the logic currently on the interface for this function, but we can actually create the name of it and add its inputs and outputs. So we're going to right click, new function, click rename. And we will call this interact. Hit compile and save. And now if we go back to our switch, we can now implement this interface on our switch. So we go to class settings. In the details panel on the bottom where it says implemented interfaces, you can click add, type in BPI. You should see interactable, the interface we just created. Click that. On the left-hand side now, there should be a new drop-down option that says interfaces. You can click interact, and it will add an event interact to our event graph. From here, we can just create a print statement to test this out. So we're going to say print text, and we will say interacted with the switch. Hit compile and save. Now what we want to do is when we hit E on our keyboard, which was the key that we chose to interact with objects, we want to call the interact function. So I'm going to go to content, third person, blueprints, and our third person character. We're in our event graph. I'm at the E. We're going to print hello. I'm in our loop, overlapping all of our actors. And what we want to do for every actor is we want to call the interact function. So we're going to say interact. And you can see class BPI interactable interact message. I'm going to connect it to the loop body. And what this does for us is, before I said you have to check to see if the object implements the interactable interface. This will do that. It's going to check to see if it implements the interactable interface. If so, then it will call interact. If it doesn't implement the interface, it's just going to ignore it and continue the loop. So now if I press compile and save, we come back to our map. I'll press play. I'm going to run up to our switch. I'm going to hit E on my keyboard, and you can see interactive with switch. If I run up to a different object, let's say this ramp over here, and hit E, you just see hello. But we go back to our switch, it now says interact. So what we want to do in the next lecture is we actually want to add custom functionality to define what it means to interact with the switch. In this case, we want to toggle our Boolean value true or false. So I'll see you there. So we're back in our BPA switch, and what we want to do is create a function to turn off or deactivate the switch. So in the event graph of our BPA underscore switch, I'll right click. I'm going to type in custom event, and we will say turn off objects. In this event, this will turn off our objects and flip our Boolean to false. So is on to is off, basically. So I'm going to hold Alt, click and drag so we can set the variable. When we turn off, we'll set is on to false, meaning it's off. We then want to create a way to give feedback to the player to show that the switch is turned off. So we're going to come up to components, click add, and we're going to type in point light. And we want to set the color to red of the point light when we turn off our switch. So I'm going to click and drag our light off the pin. We're going to say set color. And the node is called set light color. And the new light color, we're just going to set it to red. Click OK, compile, and save. We want to go to the viewport and click our point light to see where it's at. And you can see it's inside the cube. So I'm going to click the blue arrow to drag it up. That way that it's exposed. And I'm going to change the default color to green just so that we can see the difference. Click OK, compile, and save. Now we want to actually call the turn off function. So go back into our event graph. And after we say we've interacted with the switch, we're going to drag off the pin of the print text, and we're going to say turn off objects. So when we interact, we're going to print text. We will then call turn off objects. We'll then set our variable to false, is on to false, and then change the color of our point light to red. So let's go test this out before we continue. Compile and save. Go back to our third person map. Press play. And you can see a green light. If I press E on my keyboard, it turns red. And now we're kind of stuck. But we want to add some more functionality to the turn off function before we go ahead and add a turn on function. So go back into our BPA switch. The first thing that we want to do, drag off here, is we want to play a sound. So we're going to say play sound 2D. I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to look for a sound that I believe is called dockable window close. So it sounds like this. We're going to use that. So when we turn off our switch, we're going to change the light color, and we're going to play a sound effect to indicate to the player that something has happened. And then last but not least, we want a way to actually turn off or hide those obstacles. So what we're going to do is, in our My Blueprint here on the left, under variables, we're going to click the plus button, and we're going to call this objects. We'll call it tornado objects. Tornado objects. I'll change the drop down, the data type to tornado, BPA underscore tornado, and we're going to do an object reference. I'm then going to right click on the BPA tornado to change it to an array. And if you remember, an array stores a list of objects, a collection of objects. I'm going to click and drag to get our tornado objects, and we're going to use what is called a for loop. So I'm going to click the square pin and type in for each. Allow us to run specific code for every instance of the object. So the loop body means this logic off the loop body will run for every array element. And in this case, if we have 5 tornadoes, this loop body logic will run 5 times for each of those tornadoes. So what we want to do is, a while back we created a function called deactivate off our tornado object. So I'm going to click off the array pin and I'm going to say deactivate and connect my loop body pins. And what this will do is, for every single tornado object in this array, it will turn off, which means it will hide our tornado. It will turn off collision. So before we test, we want to do one more thing. In our variable down here, there's a symbol to the right of BPA tornado, and this enables the object to be instance editable, meaning I can see it exposed in the level editor. And this eyeball is connected to the instance editable in the details panel here on the right. It's the same checkbox. So if we want to check that, it will allow us to actually add tornado objects to our tornado objects array inside the editor. So let's quickly review before we test. We have a turn off function. We're going to set our Boolean value to false, so our switch is off. We're going to change the color of our point light. We're going to play one sound, and then we're going to loop through all of our objects and we're going to deactivate them. And we'll do this when we interact with our switch. So hit compile and save, come back to the third person map. You're going to click the switch inside the editor and you can see it highlighted in the outliner. And if I open my details panel and you see a section called default, where you have tornado objects, this is the array that we just created. So if you click the plus button, you can then add the tornado that is in the map to this list. So I'm going to click BPA tornado, click save at the top, press play. And when I come up to the switch and press E, you'll hear a sound, the light will change, and our tornado will go off. So we'll test it out now. There you go. Hit escape and press restart. Play again, test it one more time. Everything turns off. So in the next video, we're going to create a way to turn on our obstacles. So we've turned them off. We now want to reactivate them and turn them back on. All right, so in the previous lecture, we created a way to turn off our obstacles. So if I press play, run up to our switch, hit E, we can deactivate everything. We now want to add a way to turn everything back on. So we're going to come to our BPA_switch. It's our blueprint actor. I'm going to zoom in, right click, add custom event. We're going to call this turn on objects. And I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to highlight everything that we just wrote, or all the nodes that we created for the turn off. I'm going to highlight them all with click and drag, hit Control C on my keyboard, zoom back in, right click or click around the turn on object event, Control V to paste. You can drag everything into place to set it up, and we will walk through and change everything to update it for when we turn on our objects. So the first thing we want to do is set our Boolean value to is true. So I'm going to hit the checkbox. Our point light, we want to turn it green. So we're going to come down and choose a green color, click OK. For a play sound, we want a different sound. So instead of the close sound, we want it to potentially open. And there's one called dockable window open. I'll play it. That's the one we want. And for our tornado objects, we still want to loop through all of them, but instead of deactivating, we want to activate. So I'll drag off the array element pin, click activate, connect my loop body. And now we have a way to turn on our objects. So we're going to come up to our interact method, our event, right? This is from our BPI interactable interface. I'm going to highlight this connection, hold Alt and click to deactivate it or to remove it. I'm going to right click and say flip flop. A flip flop node allows me to flip between a Boolean, true or false. In this case, this is going to imitate, for this test, for this part of the course, imitate our Boolean value so that we can turn on and off our objects. So I'm going to connect the A node to turn off, and then the B node, we're going to say turn on. And again, we're just doing this temporarily so we can test our functionality. So now when the player interacts, we're going to print text, and depending on this value in the flip-flop, we're either going to turn off something or we're going to turn on our objects. So let's compile and save and come back to our editor, press play, and you can see everything's turned on. I'm going to hit E, turns off, and then I hit E again and it turns back on, off, on, off, on. So our switch is working as intended. We have turn off functionality and we have turn on functionality. In the next video, we want to add a reset timer because in our design, we said that our switch only allows us to turn off the objects, and then a certain amount of time will run, and then everything will just automatically turn back on. So we'll add that functionality in the next lecture. So we have the ability to turn on and off our obstacles, and now using our switch, we want to actually just turn off the switch and have it reset after a certain amount of time. So I'm back into our blueprint, our BPA switch blueprint, and we want to change some logic on our interact function and add some logic to our turn off objects. So we'll start with the turn off objects first. What we're going to do is in our for each loop, after we've deactivated everything, there's a completed pin, meaning once we've looped through every object in our tornado objects array, the completed pin will go off and we can execute some logic. And in this case, we want to execute a delay. So I'm going to type in delay. We're going to set this to just 4 seconds, but this is something that you can customize. So 4 seconds. After completed, we then want to say turn on. So what's going to happen is when we turn off our objects, we're going to set our variable to false. We're going to change the color of our light. We're going to play a sound. We'll loop through every single object in the tornado array and deactivate all the tornadoes. Once we've done all of that, the completed pin, we will start a 4-second delay, which is our switch timer. And then after 4 seconds, we're going to turn everything on by calling our turn on function, which will then turn our is on variable to true, change our color light to our green color, play a sound effect, and reactivate all of our objects. So the last thing we need to do to make this work properly is update our interact function. So instead of this flip-flop node, we're going to highlight it and click delete. We're going to turn off or highlight the turn on objects and delete the node. Off our interacted with switch, we're going to do a branch. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard. We're going to hold control and drag is on and connect the is on pin to the condition pin. And what we want to do, if our switch is on is true, we're going to turn off the objects. It will stop us from spamming the switch, meaning once it's off, and we're going to have to wait the 4 seconds before we can reactivate or turn off the switch again. So hit compile and save. We're going to go into our map and I'm going to press play. I should be able to go up to the switch, hit E on my keyboard, turn off all the objects. The switch should turn red, and then 4 seconds later, it should automatically turn on. So I'll press play, run over to the switch. Let's test it out. Wait 4 seconds. It should turn back on. There you go. So this is our switch. It's turning off obstacles. It can turn off a number of obstacles. And in the next lecture, in the next section, we want to take a look at how we can add the goal location, and then eventually we'll tie all this together to create the puzzle that we designed at the beginning of the series. Be sure to check out my website at HardlyBriefDan for more tutorials and to sign up to get the free ebook and to stay up to date on everything Hardly Brief. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.